Excellent. Hi, everyone. I am Rogerio Pinto. I am a professor at the School of Social Work, and I am also the Associate Dean for Research. I'm very happy to be here at 3 o'clock on a Thursday. I looked at the calendar today, and I found out that the first time we ever did this was March 19th. So that was the first one, and we have been doing one every week ever since, with just a couple of exceptions weeks that we skipped. So I would like to welcome everyone, everybody who's joining us, and particularly I would like to welcome my guests for today, who I will be very happily introducing in a moment. But I would like to for all of us who are here to take your attention a little bit to the chat room where I have the title of today's talk. I have the list of our guests, and I also have below the names of our guests a few questions that I sent to them for them to think about. And some of those questions also appeared in the invitation to all of you. Those are not, this is not an exhaustive list of questions. I would like for you to help me ask them as many questions as possible and to participate by typing your concerns and perhaps ideas as we move, forward into the discussions. So again, I'm Rogerio Pinto, and I'm a professor at the School of Social Work. And this event has been sponsored by the Faculty Alliance for Diversity. It's a group of professors in the School of Social Work who are concerned about underrepresented students in the university and how to develop programming to help them go through the program, the master's program, or the PhD program. The reason why, and I'll introduce them in a second as well. The reason why we have decided to do this is because somewhere around February, this new thing came about called COVID-19. We thought it was new at the time, but then later on we found out that even in December of last year, some people were already identifying this and trying to understand what this was about. Um, but we never knew because we have a government that didn't really care to do very much about it. And began to do even less when it decided that this was actually affecting populations that it, as a government, didn't care about. So we became extremely concerned about this. And in the beginning, it was really about a stigmatization that began very early in the epidemic when the president began to call this the Chinese virus and the Kung flu and many other, terrible things happened along the way. And here we are several months later with, police brutality becoming one of the major issues for us in our lifetime. Not that this wasn't happening before, but never during a COVID-19 pandemic, right? So all these things become very exacerbated because of when they are happening. And so we had several sessions, several events to talk about these current events that have surfaced, not necessarily because of COVID-19, but it had been exacerbated by COVID-19. And so we are at a point now that people have begun to people are trying to, and especially the government of the United States, trying to normalize where we are. And we are still in the middle of the pandemic with numbers actually growing in 41 states of the United States. And it's still this, state of, denial, which we know is not necessarily denial, it's very willful to create normalcy that doesn't really exist. So we saw the Secretary of Education clearly saying that we should be coming back in September as if nothing is happening. Every children in the country should be, in the classroom. And if not, then we are not going to fund anything that you do, right? I mean, all the threats that we are hearing that are happening. So here we are, and we need to think about how to return to work or to school as best as we can. And because we are very concerned about the vulnerabilities, particularly of people of color in this, which is what we talk about in this event very much. Today, we are going to look into those disparities and how they may manifest even more profoundly when we come back to whatever it is we consider to be work or school. Okay. Before we do that and I introduce the panel, I just would like for all of us to take a moment of silence for you to join me in commemoration of those that we have lost to both COVID-19 and unfortunately to a lot of the police brutality that we have seen across the country. So please join me for the moment. Thank you all for joining me. You can stay with your eyes closed for a little bit if you'd like. And let's just, try to keep this moment that we created for each one of us as we move forward into our conversation. So very quickly, the Faculty Alliance for Diversity is, I'm the co-chair of that committee. Addie Weaver, who you see toward the right of yes, beautiful, thank you so much, who is one of our guests today, is the co-chair of that committee as well. And also members of that committee are my colleagues, Trina Shanks, David Cordova, Todd Horencall, and Lorraine Gutierrez. And so those are the people who are involved in creating this event and bringing this to today. I would love to introduce you to my panel, starting with Eddie Williams, who is a PhD student. You can wave. Thank you so much. And also has been a master's, an MSW student a few years back in the School of Social Work. And they will introduce themselves much better as they start talking with you. I'd like to introduce Gabi Santiago-Romero, who also is, has been one of our students and now is a candidate for the Wayne County Commission. I'm so proud of her. Chidimma Ozor, who is an MSW candidate in the School of Social Work, and 100 other things that you'll be able to tell about two of them, not all 100. And Addie Weaver, who is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work and my fabulous colleague. So I'm going to start today with Addie. I'm just going to read very quickly the questions that I posed to them and to the group. And Ed is going to, take us into some kind of conversation. Is everyone affected equally as we return to our jobs in school? What disparities can we already identify? How can we address these new disparities that may come up when we arrive in September? How reopening brings about issues at the individual, peer, and family levels, and how does reopening may hinder and or help with community organizing efforts, which has been a major theme of this event. So I'm going to start with Eddie. Could you please answer the questions or just bring anything new that you'd like for us to begin to think about?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rogerio. I really appreciate the invitation to be part of this discussion series, and just also want to thank you for all of the work that you've done in facilitating what I've found to be a really powerful discussion series since March. And also thank you to my colleagues on the panel. Really, I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you today. So as Rogerio said, I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work, and I'm also a parent. So I've been navigating the pandemic and the racial violence that we've been seeing, while having my two children at home, and also engaging in a lot of conversation with them about the current realities and what we're seeing in the world around us. So as we think about reopening, a lot of my attention has been focused on what it's going to look like for public schools. And I am very concerned that we won't see equity as we think about reopening. And, the school district that I'm in Dexter, Michigan, has not given us information about what the fall will look like for students in our district. However, we've had a lot of surveys come out, and what I've heard is many districts are framing that there will be options and folks will have a choice as to whether they want their children to return to the classroom or whether they want their children to be able to learn remotely. And I have concern about framing it as a choice because I don't think it really is a true choice. I feel for people that have access to resources and job flexibility where they can either be home themselves or are able to hire someone to come into their home to help support their children, they can make the decision that they don't want to accept the risk that sending their children back to school may carry with it. And in my view, there is high risk regardless of the safety procedures. I have a son who would be entering a Young Fives program. I can't imagine, 4-year-olds following protocols on wearing masks or, not hugging or, kind of just engaging with one another in those ways. And so I feel like what we're doing is setting up this idea that's a choice, but really low-income families and many families of color are not going to really have a choice. And so the folks may not want to accept the risks that are involved and may still, end up having no other options but to send their children into school settings. I think that we've connected oftentimes in these sessions just our structural inequities and institutional racism play into these reopening decisions, in my view, as well, and what that's going to look like. So I think I'll stop there for now, but that's been really what's been on my mind recently.
Well, this is a wonderful start because one of the things that we have not done very well here was to talk about children because especially in the beginning, we made an assumption based on the data for sure that children were not as affected. But that has also been changing along the way and we are learning more and more that children are of course at risk. They may not have long-term effects as older people do, but they are very much at risk. So it's not just a matter of the logistics, like Eddie just told us. It's also about the risk that we might be putting our children as we send them back to school. And Gabriela, I saw that you had, you were agreeing with a lot of the things that Eddie was talking about. So I'm going to give it to you to build upon what she started.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for handing over the mic. I just was agreeing because all of that is true. I sit on a school board currently in Detroit, and as a school board member, we're taking our meetings online. How are we making decisions on our children going back to school if we ourselves aren't meeting in person because we know that there's a huge risk? In Florida, I believe 1 in 3 children have had COVID or have COVID. So if those trends are the same, it's going to happen here. And it is incredibly scary when it's not just public schools that we're dealing with, it's charter schools too. It's such a different beast, a different fight, and it's an added layer of fight because within the charter school system, they are very much about the money. They are very much about making sure that they have it, and we're not thinking through the plans of what the safety of our children. And it's if anything, it's, oh no, because of this budget cut, we have less per pupil now, and oh no, what this means. And I'm thinking, okay, but what about the health of our children who are in families who have lots of families, lots of children in their homes that will continue to expose themselves if we allow children to go back to school. So I am really worried. I am very concerned. I wish we would stop focusing so much on the economy when the people are the economy, and if people are sick and dying, we have no economy to sustain ourselves. So it's just this frustration and anger and fear and this desire to have leadership that would care more to invest in keeping us home. And even staying at home is really difficult here in Southwest Detroit. People share bedrooms. We have children. We have 3-4 children in one bedroom. We have families that are living with other families in a home, and it's difficult to also stay at home in general. So all of this is really I think what it shows, it exposes the fact that under this capitalistic system, we would never be able to survive a virus like this, and that we shouldn't have a system this way because it's not going to be able to sustain us. Under this system, we have to send people back to work, even though we shouldn't be. Like, we really shouldn't be sending people back to work. It shouldn't be a thing if we care about our health, but we are because of the economy. I wish that the government had systems set in place where we can actually pay for your mortgages. And some people are. In Oakland County, they received CARES money. They're going to feed that directly into people's mortgages and rents. Why isn't Wayne County doing that? I have my issues on that. But like, it's about leadership. It's about planning, being forward, about thinking of the issues and solutions with everything that's happening, technology, the environment. We should be thinking about the worst and preparing for those, because those things are obviously going to happen or could happen, and we're not prepared for those. And it's our children that we're risking. It's Black and brown folks that we're risking. It's immigrants that we're risking, because those are the ones that are now essential, now running our economy, to pick up our phones, to pick up the McDonald's, to go to Target. And I do hear a lot of parents, we're torn. They have to go back to work, but they can't. They don't have daycare. So it's. I again blame the system. Why isn't the system taking care of our parents so that they don't have to do and make these choices? So I'm just overall very angry, very sad, very upset, but very aware of the system changes that we have to do. That's why I studied macro social work. I'm focused on community systems and social systems, because this is incredibly unfair, and we need the help of the government. Like, this is where we need people to step up. Our federal government is not helping whatsoever. So hopefully the local government can step up. That's why I'm running. So those are my thoughts.
So Gabby, so it makes me think of a number of things, and I'm going to move to Eddie and then to Chidimma to chime in about those things. It seems to me that here we are in July, and there are many things that we didn't take care along the way, right? So everybody who has a lot more expertise than I do say that we are not quite at the moment where all hope is gone. There's still a few things that we can do, but we are approaching the moment where this is the consequences of this will be such that there will be no going back, right? So, but one of the things that came up for me from what Gabi said is that other countries that are capitalists have done it. So it's not that we are saying that it has to be one thing or another. It's just that something has to be done. And what I think you talk about anger, frustration, and sadness. So I'm going to move to Eddie and let him build on some of those things that we heard so far, and bring up any new issue that he may think about.
Yeah, can anybody hear me? So thank you. So yeah, my name is Eddie Williams. I'm a PhD candidate in social work and sociology at the University of Michigan, and also did my master's in social work at U of M and finished that in 2014. So I think one of the things that often gets lost in the conversation, especially when we talk about kids and returning to school and for parents who have to work, is we don't talk about how much support schools provide for us and how reliant we are on those things. We don't realize it until suddenly schools are off the menu, right? So I do research on Black boys' mental health. I look at boys' utilization of school mental health services, and even Black boys who have the lowest rates of school mental health use mental health services in the school. They use the counselors, they use the staff. The boys that I've talked to, I was actually in the midst of interviewing right before school shut down, how many of them told me they go to their teachers when they're sad, when they're upset. They talk to the teacher they're closest to. They use the counselors. So not being able to know, or not being able to have those services for kids is also something we have to consider as we think about schools being closed. Sorry, so many of us, I apologize.
Talking about children,
Exactly that. My son, I have an 8-year-old and I have a 10-month-old, and my son, outside of just the social skills of being in school and talking to friends and being around that, something he missed out on for the last half of the school year. And we made a decision not to send him back this next school year. But I'm privileged to do that. When I was a kid, my mom would never be able to keep me home from school because she worked 2 jobs, and me and my brother and my sister would have been the kids who like are lost in between, right? So we think about mental health services, we think about the amount of kids who experience abuse and how much of that abuse is founded in the school. My wife is works in child welfare, and she's worked throughout this pandemic, and throughout the time, she actually referrals actually went down because many of the referrals that come in for child abuse are made by teachers, right? Because they're the ones who recognize the changes in behavior, they're the ones who recognize the signs. Those are things, obviously, if we don't have kids in schools, is something that we need to consider. How do we check in for that, especially when we have kids at home for longer periods of time? We're going to see those rates, I believe, increase. We also have, food immaturity, but access to food and resources, right? So how many kids rely on schools for lunch, for breakfast? How many kids had to take home food from school for dinner? Those are things we have to also consider. So I am, again, privileged that I don't have to send my 8-year-old to school, and I can work from home and still provide him with these things. But these are also things we have to realize how much we relied on those spaces, education, school and educational spaces, to provide just basic resources for our kids. Thinking about that, I think it's shining a light on the clear disparities that we already have, that we've been just kind of patching up with. Let's throw more things into the school. Let's let the school provide those things. But we've never really addressed them in the home. We've never addressed how we can fix these things outside of that space. So, for the first time, my son was upset he couldn't go back to school. He was excited to not be in school these last few months, but now he's realized it's been 4 months since he's seen his friends, since he's played sports, since he's got to hang out in the lunchroom, all those kind of just social experiences that he had that he won't get. So that's, it's something that, and with those things, we'll see rates of depression in young people increase, especially around teenagers who use school as their biggest social environment. So I think it's something we need to consider too. How do we make those resources remote? How do we get mental health resources at home outside of the school? A friend of mine who's a special education teacher, and she can't, special education is hands-on. How do you provide that through a computer screen? So, I think these are all things we have to consider. But when we think about the racial disparities, the economic disparities that are related to all these things, that kind of are proxied by all these things, it's something we have to consider. I think Ann Arbor Public Schools, where my son is a pretty privileged school district. They provide a lot of resources. The kids got to take home iPads and laptops. The school districts that don't have those same resources, how do you do remote learning if the kids at home don't have a consistent internet service? They don't have access to a computer that's updated. I know Zoom you can change the backgrounds. People can't see your home, but if you have an old computer, you don't have the system to do that. My Mac that's only 6 years old won't let me change my background, so you get to see my mess. So I think we think about disparities. We think about just sending our kids to school. Not sending to school is very frustrating, but then we think about the things that the kids who don't go to school, what they lose out on. It's also something that is very concerning as a social worker, as a researcher, but as a parent as well. It's concerning for me. So again, something we have to take forward.
But Ed, so you bring up a very interesting point, right? I mean, or many interesting points. But I mean, so for some children whose parents have become very volatile and have become even more abusive, those kids would love to go back to school, right? And we know that is not, there are many in those circumstances, and those who are already bored out, just doing work on computers, also, probably would like to go back to school. So it's a very complicated situation, and I think the younger children they don't understand necessarily risk the way older children and adults do. So I'm doing this, Chidimma, just to bring up a more developmental way of thinking about this thing, where if we think about older individuals and even adults, what has this done to us as adults, right? To live inside of a bubble. The other day I had 8 hours with this thing in my ear. I was out of my mind by the time I finished my 8-hour day, which was not just the 8 hours. They were all 8 hours doing this and many things in between. There are consequences to these things that we are doing that are completely unnatural. So I'm going to move to Chidimma to just talk to us about, build upon what has been talked about, and bring up anything new that you'd like.
Sure. So I'm so grateful to be a part of this panel and it's already been so enriching, and that's just what these conversations are doing. I called them, when we talked earlier this week, the COVID conversations, and they've turned into, and all the things, right? And so one of the things that I was thinking about, to touch on my colleague on the panel, Eddie's experience about, I mean, he shared intimately what it was like before he became a doctoral candidate and a person that's gone through an MSW program, and what it could have been slipping through the cracks, you know, and yet you're on this panel, you're an LLMSW and a doctoral candidate, and you do research of your own, right? And so the reason I'm highlighting this is, some of you have heard me say this, we have not only a racism problem, we have a connecting the dots problem. And all of these things that we're talking about are connected. Every single conversation that has been initiated since March 19th is connected and is related, right? So we do have kids, little people is what I call them, because that's who they are. And there will be some that we lose, you know, whether it's from COVID-19, whether it's from anti-Black racist violence, right? Or anything in between. So we will lose little people, and that is to our detriment as a community. And so I am a product of Ann Arbor Public Schools. I didn't realize how fortunate, I don't know if that's the right word, privileged certainly, I am, despite other racial, social identities in which I hold that are not privileged, right? Because I'm from here. And it took me going away and coming back to recognize what was the truth, right? And when Addie started, I was thinking about COVID-19 and how with the current administration, when they came into office, I started posting more political things because I was all of a sudden more awakened myself. And so what I would start off the post with would be, wait and see, they said, well, here we are. And that's how I feel throughout the last 3 years is I've been told one thing. I know in my heart of hearts it's not the truth. And I'm like, okay, let's see what happens. And I already know what's going to happen, right? I already know. And so they said, little people, we don't have to worry. Youth or young people, 18 to 25, we don't have to worry. That is not reality. It's just not the reality. Now, when we talk about little people and COVID-19, Gabby touched on this. I'm thinking about these little people that have asthma. And why do they have asthma? Why do Black and brown kids have asthma? Because we don't care about them. Because we are dumping toxic, I'm going to keep it clean because we're recording. We're not taking care of ourselves like we're not taking care of others as we would take care of ourselves. There are no such thing as other people's children. Eddie's child that was just crying, that's my child in a manner of speaking. If I really believe that I'm a part of community, then that child crying, I need to wonder what's going on over there if there's not an adult present, right? But because we have become so individualized, now some of us, we are still very much in the collective, and some of us on this call, we got to be honest with ourselves, we are not. And so it's like, well, I'm over here and my district has enough money. We have iPads and we have all of the things. And so we're good. So we're just gonna, you know what? Just be positive, love and light, love and light. No, people can't breathe. People are dying. This is all serious. Yes, there's some joy too. And there's some urgency. And so when we start to think more critically and think about, okay, what is my role here? How can I come alongside the little people? They're adults, could be parents, could be caregivers, could be, I mean, someone wrote in the chat, grandparents who probably thought they were done. And it turns out they're not, especially if that middle generation, their children need to work in order to put food on the table, to keep these kids in clothes, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So there's so many things that it's just how my mind goes, is when someone's talking about something, I'm like, okay, how is this connected to this other thing? Because we like to talk about issues and problems in isolation, and that's not reality. That's not, which is why probably, Gabby, you're running for office, because you were a typical community member and you were like, not on my watch, I'm tired. We can't let this continue.
So let me say something about this, because in social work, I have heard over the years a lot of people who start the career as clinical social workers, right? Which is the majority of people who come into social work, with the idea that you will have a private practice. And I keep bringing that up over and over again, because one can, from a clinical perspective, do a lot that will help with all the other issues. Um, so I'm only saying this because what Chidimma said is so important, and I love that you brought up, you dump a lot of waste and pollution somewhere. Of course, it's going to affect people. So if you have a respiratory problem, of course you're going to be much more likely to develop consequences, and even more likely, perhaps, to become a host for COVID-19, and then of course have long-term effects because of the pre-existing condition that you had. So it's not far-fetched to make a connection between how one feels today and the pollution in the air. But the individualistic approach that I think capitalist countries take create the possibility for a lack of awareness and a lack of caring for the community, and the idea that we are responsible for each other in some ways, right? So I'm going to give this to Eddie to comment on, and if you could, perhaps from the perspective, of course, of a professor and someone who has a lot of students who are, in the clinical track, and how can we, as not everybody on the call for sure is a social worker, but how can we as a profession, since this is the school that is creating this event, move from this idea of the individual and take a more developmental and more holistic approach to addressing problems without getting completely overwhelmed, which is the thing that I think Chidimma, began. She didn't say that, but I think I can say that. And you tell me if I'm saying too much for you, but it's like people get overwhelmed if they have to think beyond, 2 inches away from themselves.
No, I really appreciate what has been shared, and especially Chidimma's perspective, and I think very accurate assessment that we don't connect the dots. And so for me, I feel like the individualism that we were talking about and the capitalism, as you said, Rogerio, and as Gabby mentioned, are so closely connected, and really are the underpinnings of the social welfare system, or lack thereof, that we've created in the United States. And, so for me, I think that, it's this idea where the individual kind of is elevated above community. And I think that, in that sense, we see a lot of folks who just, don't want to wear masks, and they're not thinking about others. And, I find that extremely frustrating. And even in light of Governor Whitmer's executive order, I really have not gone very many places. And a lot of times it's because I'll go somewhere, even just to do a drive-up pickup, and I'll see people going in and out of the store without masks. And I feel like I'm in a very privileged position to make the decision, well, I'm not going to go in because I don't feel like people are wearing the masks. But I feel like this idea that, there's this focus on, well, it would be an inconvenience to me to put, a piece of cloth over my face, versus I may unknowingly, infect others, or potentially be infected myself, and, then bring it back to other vulnerable folks. And I just think it's been very, very frustrating for me. But honestly, given, our historical values that really focus on individualism, especially, I would say the dominant white cultural values that focus on individualism, it's not surprising that we're seeing this happen. And so, I think that it's interesting that the government has been able to have a coordinated response to provide, billions, if not trillions of dollars to businesses through the CARES Act. However, we have not been able to come up with a comparable plan to support individuals and families. who are not able to pay for their housing, who are out of work for long periods of time, who aren't able to feed their children or have those resources that Eddie pointed out are often available through the school system. And, you know, so for me, a lot of it comes back to the fact that we, you know, want this reliance on the individual. We don't want to see dependence on government from the social welfare perspective. So, you know, I think those with power and privilege have consistently made the decision to not provide services and supports that would help build communities, and instead always go to capitalism for the answer. And, you know, this is, I think, the COVID situation is a prime example of why that doesn't work. And we can't rely on capitalism to address the needs of our most vulnerable populations.
A lot of what Eddie said, you know, clearly, you know, brings up for me the idea of the politicization, even of wearing a mask, right? And going to what Shelley's saying here in the box is that, I mean, that politicization actually allows people to go from being, they are completely irresponsible, right? You know, because they are refusing to protect themselves, but using some funny excuse because there is a situation in the country that allows for that to be used as an excuse. And I just want to bring up, and I'm going to give it to Gabby, and because it makes me very angry. So when I hear Eddie, and I just want to like give everybody permission to feel the anger. I am very angry when I'm walking around and people are coming by me and putting me at risk. Right? I mean, like that, and we had a situation a couple of days ago in Lansing, in Michigan, where someone was actually killed because of a situation related to a mask. I mean, it's a bit crazy. So so Gabby, Chidimma had her hand up. It doesn't matter. I'll go to you
Oh,
right after Chidimma. Go ahead, Gabby.
I mean, the only thing I was gonna really mention is I'm actually really, really worried about the narrative. There seems to be this underground narrative going around that is not necessarily, it doesn't look like the rights. It doesn't look like Trumpers. It doesn't look like intense right. It looks like regular white people, regular people, like everyday nice people, queer people. I even know like a few queer friends that are on there. So I thought it was a joke at first when I started to see on Instagram graphics that said wearing a mask is complete taking, it's like, something along the lines of, and they're very intense, and I'm following these accounts just to keep track of like what else is being said, the other narrative. But there's this narrative, they're not funny excuses, they're actually really scary mindsets that say, me wearing a mask is like you taking away my rights to control my body. And as a white woman who has been abused, I do not want to wear a mask because it triggers me. So we are being gaslighted by people who are currently saying, you making me wear a mask to protect you is taking away my right to live my life. And that makes me incredibly mad that we have women, queer people that like I identify with, running with this saying, I'm not wearing a mask for my own good. And what you're doing is hurting me, when I'm like, you're breathing a virus, literally, and that is the narrative that is infuriating and it is terrifying, because it looks like regular people, and it talks to them as if it's regular, and the stories that they have in these accounts, I'll try to find them and share them in the chat, are actually really scary because they're connecting them to stories. It's women saying, I saw a young woman go into a restaurant, and as soon as the worker told her to wear a mask, she started to visibly shake. And I was scared, and I was wondering, why is she shaking? And the girl said, I'm shaking because I was abused and I had a mask over my head and now I can't do it. And it's got thousands of followers and thousands of likes. And this is the scary narrative that connects stories to abuse, to triggers, to control. So to me, I'm actually really scared of not even like these funny, like, it's not funny. It's actually really dangerous. These narratives, these stories that people are telling, because they are directly the opposite of what we're trying to say about safety and caring for each other. And that's what terrifies me. And I'm going to look these up and put them in the chat because I need all of us to try to figure out what else is being said that we don't know about. And that's actually what we're up against, because there are so many different narratives. There are so many different paths, right? And there's one that I found out that I didn't even know about. I didn't even know that there were people who actually thought this, who are going around having thousands of followers, and it's now even in the queer community. Like, that hurt me so much to see just like couples with children without masks, and I'm saying it's their rights to not have to do that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, then when is this fight going to end? So those are my thoughts. You're muted, Rogerio, I'm sorry.
It is their right until they get infected and infect all of us, right? And of course, I mean, we do need to be aware of people's individual needs, right? I mean, I don't want anybody to have a panic attack because they have to, they have to wear a mask. But the person doesn't have to go inside of the store, right? They may order from outside. There are many solutions to this individual problem. I think the major problem that we are facing here, and I'm going to go to Chidimma before I go to Eddie, and then I'll go to you, because it is, again, bringing this issue to the absolutely individual level and then creating a problem out of it that doesn't really need to exist. Because if you don't go inside of the store, you don't have to put the mask on, right? And epidemiologically, you would be doing the right thing. Chidimma.
Stay home then. If you don't want to wear a mask, to your point, stay home. I mean, there are solutions. You know what there's not a solution for? Me not being Black. There's no solution. I love my caramel skin. I love who I am. I am grateful. And yet, I brought props, y'all, today. I brought this shirt. I was going to wear it, but then I decided to wear something else. It says, legalize being Black. Hopefully everyone can see that. Legalize being Black, from a Black-owned company. The reason I brought this prop was because Black folks do not have the privilege to not be Black at any point in their lives, right? So if I walk out and I'm wearing a mask because so I'm actually immunocompromised. I'm more concerned, though, I will say this, about racism and the global pandemic that is, than COVID-19. It doesn't mean I'm not concerned about COVID-19. I am. So I wear a mask because it's my duty. Rights? Yes. And it's interesting that some of the folks that are the most adamant about someone not telling them what to do with their body are the most adamant about telling me what to do with mine, right? So we have a problem here. And they haven't connected those dots. I have, they haven't, right? And so when we have, whether it's Black men or Black folks broadly, going out, attempting to live their best life, certainly just doing things that people do, like grocery shopping, like picking things up curbside, like walking their dogs, like et cetera, right? Now we have people, usually white people, who feel entitled to know what is going on, right? They're not law enforcement. They're not EMTs. They are not the divine. They are just regular, you know what, people who just happen to be around. And then now they're scared. So they were scared before the mask, and now they're scared and terrified because of the mask. Now, if I'm attempting to live my best life, I'm doing what has been asked of me by my governor, whether I like it or not. Let me tell you something. I went out today because I had some stuff to do. I actually had a medical procedure done quickly, and I was masked. The technician was masked. It was not comfortable, y'all. I didn't like it. I don't like wearing a mask. But you know what? I also don't really like going to the dentist. And yet here we are. I go, I haven't liked, if I needed to pay taxes, I probably wouldn't like that either. And that's what you do because you're an adult and you just do the things that are your duty, right? So when I say legalize being Black and I wear this t-shirt, it means that for some of us, many of us, who are doing the next right thing. We're doing the thing that's been asked of us. We have been asked, if you're in the state of Michigan, you wear a mask when you're going into public, when you can't socially distance, blah, 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 right? And then what happens? So when we're speaking of returning to something, whether it's school, whether it's work, whether it's spaces, it's not equitable, right? If diversity is great, it's not really that great though. alone. I don't really want to hear about diversity anymore. I want to hear about equity, and I want to hear about inclusion, right? Because those things, and even those three things together are kind of wah, 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 wah. I want to hear about anti-racism, and I want to hear about anti-oppression, because the systems that we have in place, yes, individuals are terrible sometimes. I say I love the divine and I love humanity, and people get on my damn nerves. That said, it goes beyond just the individuals. It has to go to the foundation. We need to strip the foundation. We need to dismantle the systems, like bomb them. Bomb is not the right word. I think demo them, right? Demolish them so we can start fresh. And then I'm gonna pass my time. I get really passionate, y'all.
Well, we like the passion, right? I mean, and I think sometimes we need someone to express some of that passion for us. So you just did it beautifully for me in a number of ways. Eddie, how would you like to build upon all the things that have been talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I was much of what was just said is similar. My first thought is, as a black man, if I can put on a mask and walk around this kind of surface liberal Ann Arbor, and I say surface because it's liberal on the surface, but I would argue it's conservative underneath. But anybody can put on a damn mask, you know. And reality is, if I can walk around and cover my face and know that there's people like Elijah McClain who was killed by police for having a mask over his face, right? And I take that risk every day. I go outside. I don't really believe any excuses people have for not wearing a mask. You know, I know that I'm doing it not necessarily for my own protection, but for others' protection. You know, I am already being safe. I'm already doing social distancing. I'm already quarantining myself. So when I step outside, you know, in a space where other people are at, it's for other people's protection. So I'm putting my life at risk to protect others, right? It's just the reality of it. And people in this country that have experienced abuse and degradation and terror at the hands of police, at the hands of the society, every day have to learn how to adapt to the society they're in. They have to choose to adapt, choose to walk outside and watch how they move, watch where they go, watch the neighborhood they're in, watch the community they're in, because they know that there's a risk for them. So why can't we as a larger society adapt to the situation we're in right now? If you don't want to wear a mask, don't get out the car. Don't go in the store. You know, don't go to the park. Don't go to a place where you know there's going to be groups of people at. You know, if everyone else has to adapt to the situations that they're put into, not by their own fault, then it shouldn't be hard for those who are at less risk already socially to adapt. So, you know, one of the things that was really concerning, taking it back to schools, was they were saying that if kids go back to schools, they have to wear masks. I have a black son, and it makes me nervous for him to wear a mask around all day in spaces where I feel like my son goes to a school that's predominantly white, and most people know him, so I'm not worried about in the school someone harming him. I'm worried about him catching the bus and getting off at his bus stop and still having his mask on and someone misidentifying him. And my son is actually, I'm short, my son is actually tall for his age. So that was one of the things I'm like, oh my God, I don't want him walking around with a mask over his face.
Eddie, can I just ask a question about that? Because I want you to expand on this a little bit. So one of the things that I have noticed is the type of mask some people use, right? So if you're afraid to wear a mask and how you're going to be identified, and I think that some of my attitudes have been around this. So you wear something that's more medically looking, right? You don't go out with, you know, if you're out in the demonstration, you have a mask that may say something, Black Lives Matter. But if you are alone, the kind of mask that you use is a bit different, right? The decorations in the mask, what do they say and what they convey, and who can and who cannot wear the fashionable masks anywhere that they want. I mean, and as we think about returning to anything, and all of us will have to be wearing a mask, the disparity even resides in the fashion statement that you make from the mask, which is a very American thing, right? I mean, most places, this whole thing about like creating very fashionable masks has not necessarily been historically the thing that other people have done when they have pandemics to respond to. So what are your thoughts about this? And then I'm going to go to Addie Weaver.
Yeah, I think exactly what you said. Like, you know, we have to make decisions on what kind of mask we even wear just to protect ourselves. So for the longest, I wore like a medical kind of gray looking mask that I just happened to, I had some in the house already. And that those just finally kind of broke down. I can't wear them anymore. They're finally like falling apart. So I had to go to Target and buy like the mask that people are kind of making on their own, and it's black or dark blue, and that makes me really nervous walking around with like a black mask that is shaped like that covers all of this across. One of the things also for me is I smile when I'm in the presence of white people. Just to be honest, I'm very cautious about my demeanor and how I look when I'm in the presence of people who I feel kind of threatened by, and I'm very like I'm not a threat to you. Don't So now people can't see my face. I'm also cautious about that. But yeah, the designs, the styles, the statements people make on the mask, when and where you can wear those things, is strongly influenced by your identity, by the identities that you can't check. The ones that show up, your gender, your race, those things that stand out so quickly. So I think we have to think about that also as we go forward with this, about the challenges people who are choosing to wear masks experience. So for those who make a conscious decision not to wear a mask for whatever reason, and then try to weaponize their experience with abuse, weaponize their whatever it is that they're using to justify why they don't wear it, it's irresponsible and it's disrespectful to others who really are putting themselves at risk to wear these things out in public. It's just the reality of it. And people,
Yeah.
I've heard people say it's not that serious, but the reality is we turn on TV and we see. Matter of fact, there was a guy, a store in Kentwood, right near Grand Rapids here in Michigan, that put up a sign that said they don't want people wearing masks in the store, and that their stores, that their employees are armed, and that if you wear a mask, pretty much don't be afraid, don't be mad because we confuse you for a robber, we might kill you. And he said it was a joke, but for someone like me, I mean that's very serious. If I walk into a store, especially a smaller store, and I'm one of the people in there without a mask on, I don't want them to assume that I'm here to rob or steal. And we know that is tied to racial prejudices about Black people, right? Especially Black men. So it's a real, it's this is all off topic, but it's a real thing to think about for those who are making excuses not to wear masks. But
it's a scary business.
Yeah.
And as we come back, and I want to go to Addie Weaver now. We have been hiding right behind the screen. And I think what's been asked of us, particularly all of us related to schools and universities and having our children going back, it's basic after X number of months to expose ourselves. And we have been behind this thing. We don't know how to do that yet. Eddie.
Yes, so I really appreciate what Eddie shared and completely agree. And it actually also made me think of something that's a little bit of another direction, but I was hoping to have a little bit of time to share. So as Eddie shared, he is a doctoral candidate, and he has 2 children in his home, and he is exceptional. So maybe some of you know this, but Eddie successfully defended his prospectus, and so he's going to start working on his dissertation during this time of COVID with 2 children in the home. And one thing that I've been thinking about as we think about kind of reopening and what the fall might look like is that we have student parents at our university who are going to need support. And I wonder what that's going to look like. And there's been a group of us coming together with the Faculty Allies for Diversity Committee, and Brianna Starks, one of our doctoral students at the school, has organized it. And this is a real concern, just that there's really not been discussion or responses from the university about what this is going to look like for student parents in terms of resources for childcare subsidies that often have very rigid kind of regulations in terms of where those subsidies can be used, and don't allow folks to utilize those for in-home caregivers. And just thinking about what we're asking of our students during this time when they're also supporting children at home and likely will be doing so in the fall. So it's just something that I feel like also needs to be discussed and thought about as we consider coming back. And of course, there's a lot of safety issues. I'm very concerned about, having people on campus. We saw a house party in Saline last week, led to a lot of COVID cases. So I'm not sure what that's, going to look like at all. So, I mean, I think Gabby's point about public health and safety versus economics is central. And also within these spaces, I think that there's certain groups within our community that are, going to be having unique circumstances that we want to be aware of, and be able to kind of think about, what support can we provide for reopening, so that, students like Eddie, who are like on this moving train, super successful, can, have the support that they need to continue what they need to do, and also keep their children safe.
Thank you, Eddie. And so it leads us to going through our panel with recommendations or ideas for making this return more humane, which is what I think Eddie is bringing us to think about. How can we make this not only safe, but also more humane? Gabby, what are your ideas?
So I have many. I think two that I'll touch on is, since COVID started and since it hit Michigan, I know for us in Southwest Detroit, I was a part of, I'm starting a mutual aid group, so Southwest Cares. We raised around $70,000. And this money went directly back into providing money to about 300 families. So one thing I would say is turn to your neighbors and use your resources, because they're there, and support each other starting today, and making the plan is to support each other tomorrow when it gets worse. Because if it goes the way that people are saying that it's going to go, we're going to get hit again and might have to shut down. I hope that's not the case. But if that is the case, support your neighbors and be prepared to feed each other and pay your bills and have them over safely if they need Wi-Fi. We got to figure something out. The other thing I would say is get really engaged in local politics and your local government. County commissioners, we always talk about city, or we'll talk about the states. When I talk about the county oversees for Wayne County, we have the biggest county budget. It's a $1.6 billion budget. The majority of that right now goes to roads and to our jails. The money that's going to our jails could be going to things like Head Starts. It could be going to things like mental health. It could be going to things like paying for rent and for mortgages. Oakland County is doing this with their CARES money. So I would get engaged locally and look at budgets and say, why is there so much money coming in X when it should be going to Y right now? And completely reshifting it, and how our thinking of safety, thinking of safety and thinking of sustainability. So it's those things, go within, and also get ready to push out people that are, in those systems.
Fabulous. All of my colleagues who will be teaching in the fall, we should be talking about these things that Gabby just brought up. First day of our class, all of us, hopefully we will be doing a lot of that. Eddie.
Oh, there's so much, and I don't think there's ever a perfect solution to anything. Our system is already so reliant on essential workers, on schools, and provide things for kids. But I think I think we need to keep the pressure on the universities. Schools like University of Michigan, but also on our county, our state, kind of governments, to provide resources for those who need it. For student parents like myself, for faculty with kids like Addie, and who are pushing ahead. My daughter goes to a childcare provider that's a private person that we just happen to know, who lives alone, who we know is safe, but I can't pay for that with my childcare subsidy because she's not a licensed provider. So I have to pay that out of pocket, which means I'm coming out of pocket, $600-700 a month that I didn't plan on spending. And now that I'm working from home, I really need her because, well, you heard her cry earlier. So we have to keep that pressure on. To make sure that the funding and resources that we do have available go to the right spaces. Things like the CARES Act that was passed through our government, where it was decent, but we know a majority of that money went to larger corporations, right? And we've seen large businesses taking funds from smaller businesses to use, right? So, be aware of those things. I think we also, at the individual level, need to be very strategic in how we provide for others too. If you have a neighbor who doesn't have Wi-Fi service and they have kids in school, offer them to use your Wi-Fi. If you have an old laptop, donate that to a student. I think there's things at the individual level and at the national level we all can do to make sure that we are, to the best of our ability, helping others. And I think if anything has come from this is showing that as a collective, is the only way that we can be successful in making any type of leeway back is a collective. We have to, do for others as we want to do for ourselves.
Thank you so much, Ed. Chidimma.
So really briefly, it touches on what some of my colleagues just mentioned. So recognize that you are probably part of the problem. Very few folks don't fall into that category. So I teach yoga, I've taught for over 10 years. And when I look at the room, I will teach to someone who is not in alignment that is, how do I put this? I want their alignment to allow them to continue to practice over time, right? I'm not looking for perfection. And so I will speak to them, and likely other folks will make adjustments because they're probably out of alignment too. You're probably out of alignment. So you're probably part of the problem. You're probably upholding systems that are problematic. So do your own work. That's my encouragement. We all have work to do. The other thing is recognize that you yourself do have a circle of influence. You do wield some power. And I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it in a positive way. I am going to submit a policy brief to Debbie Dingle. Is it going to work? Who knows? It certainly won't work if I don't submit it, right? So understand that you can be part of the solution. So as much as you could be part of the problem, and probably are, you could also become a part of the solution. Start doing your work and do something else for someone else.
I am so happy with this panel. Thank you guys so much for everything that you had to share. The beautiful thing about this is that it's being recorded and it is going to be on YouTube. I recommend and ask everyone who thought that the conversation was productive to send this to other people to see. This has been an incredible experience, having so many different people coming together and having these conversations. So this is the end of our hour. I would like to announce that I am going to be taking a break between now and when we actually return in September. I do not know for sure 100% the future of this event. Chances are that I will be back here with my colleagues because I don't think COVID-19 is going away anytime soon. The predictions are that because the numbers are actually going up now in the summer, it's very clear that the virus is not going to go away in the winter or the fall. It's actually going to be one or more waves of this. And so this is the latest science, right? I mean, that we see. And so unfortunately, I don't think that this is going to go away. And unfortunately, the disparities that we have seen so far, some of them may get better. Some of them may actually get worse as we move forward. And so I would like to thank Chidimma and Eddie and Gabby and Eddie for being here with me today, and all of you who have been here not only today, but so many of you have been here consistently for so long. I'm very proud of this entire group. And again, thanks to the Faculty Alliance for Diversity. And this ends our broadcast. Thank you guys so much. This has been incredible. Yes.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.